The most epic confrontation. Hollywood Studios versus Dean Martin's independence and charm. The studio system's iron grip. In the glittering, yet often ruthless, landscape of mid-20th century Hollywood, power was concentrated in the hands of a few colossal entities, the major studios. MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, 20th Century Fox, and RKO were not merely film production companies. They were empires. They owned vast backlots, controlled distribution networks, and, most crucially, held their stars in an iron grip through long-term, often draconian, contracts. This was the era of the studio system, a period of unparalleled cinematic output, but also one of profound artistic and personal subjugation for the very individuals who brought the magic to the silver screen. Imagine a world where your career, your public image, and even aspects of your private life were meticulously managed, dictated, and owned by a corporation. This was the reality for Hollywood's biggest names. Actors and actresses were not just employees. They were assets, carefully cultivated and marketed products. Their contracts often spanned 7 years, renewable at the studio's discretion, and contained clauses that would make a modern-day talent agent blanch. Studios could dictate what roles a star played, how many films they made a year, who they dated or married, what they wore, and even what they said in public. They had departments dedicated to crafting a star's persona, ensuring it aligned with the studio's brand and the public's expectations. The benefits, for those who played by the rules, were undeniable. The studio system offered unparalleled security, a steady stream of work, and the machinery to transform ordinary individuals into global icons. They provided acting coaches, voice lessons, dance instructors, and publicists. They built careers from the ground up, turning raw talent into polished, bankable stars. For many, it was a golden cage, luxurious and seemingly secure, but a cage nonetheless. The price of fame was often personal freedom, creative autonomy, and the right to simply be oneself. Into this highly structured, meticulously controlled environment, a young man named Dino Paul Crocetti was slowly, almost inadvertently, making his way. Born in Steubenville, Ohio, in 1917, Dean Martin was an unlikely candidate for Hollywood's rigid system. His early life was a patchwork of odd jobs: steel mill worker, boxer, kid crochet, blackjack dealer, and finally, a singer in local clubs. He possessed an innate charm, a smooth, effortless vocal style, and a laid-back demeanor that belied a sharp wit and an even sharper business sense. He was a natural, but not in the manufactured Hollywood sense. His appeal was organic, unforced, and deeply personal. Dean was a man who valued comfort, good company, and the simple pleasures of life. He wasn't driven by an insatiable hunger for fame or an obsessive need for artistic validation in the way some of his contemporaries were. He wanted to work, to entertain, and to provide for his family, but always on his own terms. This inherent independence, this almost casual defiance of convention, was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode within the confines of the studio system. He was a free spirit in an industry built on chains, a man who instinctively recoiled from being told what to do, how to act, or who to be. The studios, with their vast resources and entrenched power, believed they could mold anyone. They had done it countless times before, transforming raw talent into compliant, profitable stars. But Dean Martin was different. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to deflect pressure, to charm his way out of obligations he found distasteful, and to maintain an air of nonchalance even when the stakes were incredibly high. He was a paradox, a superstar who seemed utterly indifferent to the trappings of stardom, a man who could command millions while appearing to care only about his next golf game or martini. This fundamental clash of philosophies, the studio's desire for absolute control versus Dean Martin's unwavering commitment to his own easygoing authenticity, would set the stage for one of Hollywood's most epic and often understated confrontations. It wasn't a battle fought with public declarations or dramatic walkouts, but with quiet defiance, strategic charm, and an unshakable belief in his own worth. The studios, accustomed to breaking wills, were about to meet a man whose will was as smooth and unyielding as his voice. They would soon discover that trying to put Dean Martin in a box was like trying to catch smoke with a net. If you're fascinated by the hidden battles and untold stories behind Hollywood's golden age, hit that subscribe button. We bring you the real drama, the unsung heroes, and the legendary figures who shaped entertainment. Don't miss out on our next deep dive. The meteoric rise of Dean Martin began not as a solo act, but as one half of one of the most successful comedy duos in entertainment history, Martin and Lewis. In 1946, Dean, the smooth crooner, teamed up with the manic, rubber-faced comedian Jerry Lewis. Their chemistry was instantaneous and explosive. Dean's effortless cool and vocal talent provided the perfect foil for Jerry's wild, unpredictable energy. They were an overnight sensation, first in nightclubs, then on radio, and quickly, inevitably, in Hollywood. Paramount Pictures, recognizing their undeniable appeal, signed the duo to a lucrative, albeit standard, studio contract in 1948. The terms were typical for the era, long-term, exclusive, and granting the studio immense control over their careers. For Jerry, who was ambitious and eager to please, the structure of the studio system initially seemed like a dream come true. He embraced the opportunities, the publicity, and the chance to learn the craft of filmmaking from the ground up. For Dean, however, the constraints began to chafe almost immediately. Their early films, like My Friend Irma, 1949, and At War with the Army, 1950, were box office gold. The public adored their antics, and the studio was thrilled. But behind the scenes, the cracks in the partnership and Dean's growing discomfort with the studio's demands were beginning to show. Paramount wanted to replicate their success formula, churning out film after film, often with little regard for script quality or artistic development. They saw Martin and Lewis as a cash cow, and they intended to milk it dry. Dean, despite his laid-back persona, was a perfectionist when it came to his craft, particularly his singing. He also possessed an innate sense of what worked and what didn't. He found many of the scripts repetitive and uninspired, offering him little more than a straight-man role to Jerry's increasingly dominant comedic presence. He yearned for more substantial acting roles, for songs that showcased his vocal range, and for a schedule that allowed him time for his family and his beloved golf course. The studio, however, had a different vision. They saw Dean as the handsome crooner, the romantic lead, but always secondary to Jerry's comedic genius. They tried to mold him, to fit him into their preconceived notions of what a movie star should be. They dictated his wardrobe, his public appearances, and even attempted to control his off-screen image. But Dean, with his quiet defiance, resisted. He would often arrive late to meetings, feign disinterest in promotional events, or simply refuse to engage in conversations he found tedious or creatively stifling. His charm was his shield, his nonchalance a weapon. The first significant clash wasn't a dramatic shouting match, but a slow, simmering resentment that built over years. Dean felt increasingly marginalized within the duo and increasingly stifled by Paramount's rigid control. He saw Jerry's ambition growing, his desire to direct and produce, and felt himself being pushed further into the background. The studio, in turn, often sided with Jerry, seeing him as the more manageable and creatively driven half of the team. Dean's growing dissatisfaction wasn't just about creative input, it was about respect and autonomy. He understood his value, his unique appeal, and he resented being treated as a mere cog in the studio's machine. He wanted to choose his projects, to have a say in his artistic direction, and to maintain a semblance of personal freedom. These were radical notions in an era where studios expected absolute obedience. The tension between Dean and Jerry, exacerbated by studio interference and the relentless pressure of their schedule, eventually reached a breaking point. After 16 films in 10 years, and a partnership that had generated millions, Martin and Lewis performed their last show together at the Copacabana in July 1956. The breakup was acrimonious and highly publicized, with many in Hollywood predicting Dean's career would flounder without Jerry. The studios, particularly Paramount, saw this as an opportunity to reassert control. They believed Dean, now stripped of his famous partner, would be more pliable, more desperate for work, and thus more willing to conform. They underestimated him. The breakup, while personally painful, was also a liberation for Dean. It freed him from a partnership that had become creatively restrictive and from a studio system that had sought to define him. He was now on his own, vulnerable perhaps, but also finally free to chart his own course. The stage was set for Dean Martin to prove everyone wrong, and in doing so, to challenge the very foundations of Hollywood power. The Martin and Lewis breakup was a huge moment. What do you think was the real reason behind their split? Was it creative differences, studio pressure, or something else? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. The immediate aftermath of the Martin and Lewis split was, as many predicted, challenging for Dean. The industry had largely written him off, convinced that his charm was merely a reflection of Jerry Lewis's comedic genius. Critics were harsh, and job offers were scarce. It was a period of professional uncertainty, a stark contrast to the relentless pace of his previous decade. But Dean Martin was not one to wallow in self-pity or succumb to external pressures. He possessed an inner resilience, a quiet determination that few recognized beneath his easygoing exterior. He returned to his roots, singing. He signed a new record deal with Capitol Records and began releasing solo albums that showcased his smooth, effortless baritone. Hits like Memories Are Made of This, 1955, released just before the split but indicative of his solo potential, and Volare, 1958, proved that his appeal as a singer was undeniable and independent of any comedic partner. His records sold millions, reaffirming his star power in a different medium. Then came the film role that would redefine his acting career and silence his detractors, Some Came Running, 1958. Directed by Vincente Minnelli and starring Frank Sinatra and Shirley MacLaine, the film offered Dean a dramatic role that allowed him to showcase his depth and range. His performance as Bama Dillard, the cynical, gambling-addicted best friend, earned him critical acclaim and a Golden Globe nomination. It was a revelation. Dean Martin was not just a crooner or a comedian's sidekick. He was a legitimate actor. With his recording career soaring and his acting prowess finally recognized, Dean's leverage in Hollywood shifted dramatically. Studios, which had once dismissed him, now clamored for his talent. But this time, Dean was wiser, more confident, and fiercely protective of his newfound independence. He understood his value, and he was no longer willing to be a pawn in the studio system's game. This marked the true beginning of his contract rebellion. Dean began to demand terms that were almost unheard of for stars of his era. He insisted on fewer films, better scripts, and significant creative input. He wanted a percentage of the profits, not just a flat salary. He also famously demanded a clause that allowed him to leave the set by 6 p.m. every day, regardless of whether filming was complete, so he could make his dinner reservations or golf tee times. This wasn't just about convenience. It was a deliberate assertion of control, a subtle yet powerful message to the studios. My time is my own, and I will not be dictated to. His public persona, the charming, martini-swilling, laid-back crooner, became both authentic and a strategic shield. It allowed him to appear unconcerned, even lazy, while subtly asserting his will. When a studio executive would complain about his demands or his perceived lack of effort, Dean would simply shrug, flash his famous smile, and say something like, "Hey, I'm just here to sing a few songs and make a few pictures. If you don't like it, there's the door." This nonchalance disarmed his opponents and made it incredibly difficult for studios to apply the usual pressure tactics. How do you threaten someone who genuinely seems not to care? One notable instance of his defiance involved a film where he was unhappy with the script. Instead of engaging in lengthy arguments or dramatic walkouts, Dean simply started showing up to set late, delivering his lines with a noticeable lack of enthusiasm, and making it clear through his demeanor that he was not invested. The studio, desperate to keep production on schedule and avoid costly delays, eventually capitulated, allowing for script revisions that met his approval. He didn't need to shout. His quiet disapproval was enough to force their hand. The studios, accustomed to absolute control, were initially taken aback. They tried to exert pressure, threatening to blacklist him or withhold future projects. But Dean held firm. He knew he had options: his booming recording career, his increasingly popular nightclub acts, and the burgeoning television market. He wasn't dependent on any single studio for his livelihood. This financial independence was his greatest weapon against the studio system's iron grip. He wasn't afraid to walk away from lucrative deals if the terms weren't right. He understood that his unique brand of charm and talent was his most valuable asset, and he refused to let anyone else dictate its deployment. This was a radical departure from the norm, where stars often felt trapped by their contracts and beholden to the studios that had made them. Dean Martin was making himself, on his own terms, and the studios were slowly but surely realizing they had met their match. The breaking point had been reached, and Dean Martin was not breaking. He was bending the rules to his will. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Dean Martin's legendary career and his fight for freedom, give this video a like. Your support helps us create more content about these incredible Hollywood stories. The late 1950s and early 1960s saw Dean Martin solidify his position as a true independent force in Hollywood, largely thanks to his association with the legendary Rat Pack. Led by Frank Sinatra, and including Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, the Rat Pack was more than just a group of entertainers. They were a symbol of star power operating outside the traditional studio system. Their legendary performances in Las Vegas, where they commanded unprecedented salaries and drew massive crowds, demonstrated that stars could thrive and even dictate terms without being tethered to a single studio. Within the Rat Pack, Dean Martin occupied a unique and pivotal position. While Sinatra was the undeniable leader, the driving force, Dean was the embodiment of effortless cool and independence. He was the one who truly seemed to live life on his own terms, a man who worked when he wanted, how he wanted, and always with a martini in hand. His don't care attitude wasn't just a persona. It was a philosophy that perfectly countered the studio's meticulous, controlled production methods. Dean's approach to filmmaking became legendary. He famously disliked rehearsals, preferring to deliver his lines with a natural, spontaneous flair. He often insisted on one take, believing that the first take captured the most authentic performance. While this drove some directors and producers to distraction, it also often resulted in performances that were remarkably fresh and genuine. He had an uncanny ability to hit his marks, deliver his lines, and nail the emotional beat in a single go, making his laziness a form of genius. The studios, despite their frustration, were caught in an impossible bind. They hated Dean's lack of conformity, his refusal to be managed, and his casual disregard for their established protocols. Yet, they couldn't ignore him. His films, especially those with the Rat Pack like Ocean's 11, 1960, and Sergeant 3, 1962, were massive box office successes. His records continued to sell millions, and his Vegas shows were consistently sold out. Dean Martin was a guaranteed draw, a bankable star whose charm transcended any studio's attempts to control him. This created a legendary standoff. The studios needed Dean, but they couldn't break him. They tried their usual tactics, threatening to cut his pay, to assign him undesirable roles, or to delay his projects. But Dean simply shrugged. He had his music, his Vegas shows, and his golf. He wasn't dependent on any single film or studio. His famous line, "I'm going home," became a quiet declaration of independence. If the conditions weren't right, if the script was bad, or if the schedule was too demanding, Dean would simply pack up and leave. And more often than not, the studio would eventually capitulate, knowing that losing Dean Martin meant losing millions. He refused to promote films he didn't believe in, often giving hilariously blunt assessments to interviewers. He insisted on specific directors or co-stars, using his leverage to shape the creative teams around him. He was a master of subtle negotiation, achieving his goals not through confrontation, but through an almost zen-like detachment that left studio executives bewildered and ultimately defeated. The power shift was undeniable. Dean Martin, along with Sinatra and the Rat Pack, demonstrated that stars could indeed have the upper hand. They proved that collective star power, combined with individual financial independence, could dismantle the studio's traditional authority. This era marked a significant crack in the studio system's iron grip, paving the way for future generations of artists to demand more creative control and better financial terms. Further cementing his independence, Dean launched The Dean Martin Show in 1965. This variety show became a massive hit, running for 9 seasons. It was another platform where Dean could truly be himself, hosting a relaxed, informal show that perfectly suited his persona. He had creative control, a comfortable schedule, and a direct connection with millions of viewers, further reducing his reliance on the film studios. The show was a testament to his enduring appeal and his ability to thrive on his own terms, proving that his lazy charm was, in fact, a highly effective and lucrative business strategy. Dean Martin wasn't just a performer, he was a quiet revolutionary. With a martini in hand and a twinkle in his eye, he showed Hollywood that true star power couldn't be manufactured or controlled. It had to be earned, respected, and ultimately allowed to flourish independently. His standoff with the studios wasn't a loud, dramatic battle, but a masterclass in subtle defiance, a testament to the power of unwavering authenticity in the face of corporate might. Dean Martin's cool defiance was legendary. Share this story with someone who loves classic Hollywood or anyone who appreciates a good underdog story. Let's spread the word about how Dean Martin changed the game. Dean Martin's quiet rebellion against the studio system was, by all accounts, a resounding victory. In conclusion, Dean Martin wasn't just a performer, he was a quiet revolutionary. With a martini in hand and a twinkle in his eye, he helped redefine the relationship between stars and studios. He proved that an artist could be both immensely successful and fiercely independent, setting a precedent for future generations. His confrontation with Hollywood's iron grip wasn't a loud, dramatic battle, but a masterclass in subtle defiance, a testament to the power of unwavering authenticity in the face of corporate might. His story serves as a powerful reminder that even in the most controlled environments, individual spirit and determination can carve out a path to freedom. Dean Martin, the king of cool, didn't just entertain, he inspired. He showed that true success isn't just about fame or fortune, but about the ability to live and work on your own terms, to maintain your integrity, and to always be yourself. He left behind not just a catalog of timeless entertainment, but a blueprint for artistic autonomy that continues to resonate in Hollywood today. Don't miss out on more incredible stories of Hollywood legends and their battles for creative freedom. Subscribe to our channel now and hit the notification bell so you're always the first to know when we drop a new video. Join our community of film history enthusiasts today.